Welcome to Mastering CS Candid Leader Insights, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of customer success with industry leaders. I'm your host, Irina Cismas, and today's guest is Aaron Spence, Head of Customer Success at NoFraud. Aaron, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
My pleasure. Your career has always been about solving problems and creating an impact, even when your roles weren't labeled as customer success. How do you see this journey contributing to CS regardless of the job title?
Absolutely. So the early part of my career was in education, more on the service delivery side is what I like to call it. I was not a teacher. I was not a traditional administrator. And so for me, there was always this understanding that I have to serve someone. I have to serve a customer, if you will. And it was students or administrators or teachers. And so I was in technology deployment. I was implementing new systems. And if you know teachers, they're not necessarily the happiest when it comes to changing how they've done things for 30 years. And so early in my career, I learned about the importance of rapport building. I learned really early on about the importance of relationships, personal relationships, especially as we're trying to understand the nature of what we're solving. And so even early on in my career, I was sort of doing customer success. But even then, that was 15 years ago, that was relatively new, a new concept that businesses were starting to kind of come to terms with. But for me, I always knew I had to do service delivery and I had to do it in my own way. And it just so happened that those skill sets perfectly aligned with customer success. And so I probably had a slightly faster career trajectory because I already had some practice doing the work, even if the concepts weren't called the same thing. So that's kind of how I think about the arc of my career is I was serving a client, delivering a product, and using rapport building, all those technical and soft skills to deliver a result, which was kind of the same as CS.
I do have some questions prepared about the skill set and the way you blend them in. I want to start the discussion and tackle the subject of scaling because everyone is chasing it and you've actually done it. And growing the revenue from 4 million to 31 million in just 5 years is no small feat. So I want to ask you, what did it take to drive that kind of growth? And what did you do?
Well, within those 5 years, I'd like to also point out we had 2.5 years of a pandemic. That's why I have gray in my beard. But I try to reduce things to its core elements.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing is we really had to get clear on how we were solving the problem for the client in multiple phases of their journey, right? And so the company was Design Pickle, creative services. Well, small businesses and large businesses operate differently, but small businesses and creative services can grow rapidly. So how do you solve for their pain points early on and scale alongside them? And so we had to do that. That was kind of number one. Like, how can we deliver high quality as they are growing? Not as we're growing, but as they are growing. That's kind of more important. And then number two was internally, we had to get crystal clear on our value proposition and build an operating system, right? This is a really big thing I care about is operating systems within a business. Once we kind of crystallized and clarified and articulated that, we were able to have everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. You know, all the analogies you want, sports, music, whatever it is, we were doing the same thing in the same way. And that mattered a lot. And it really reduced the amount of unnecessary friction we had in order to solve problems. We definitely tried a lot. We moved fairly quickly. We broke things. We maintained no ego, all those kind of basic tenets. But it all came out of that operating system, which was powered by our mission, our vision, our values, our crystallized practices, et cetera. So you've got to figure out how you're going to solve the client's problem now and tomorrow. And you've got to make sure you're operating well.
Let's go one deeper into the operating system. What does this operating system mean for you? And how do you make sure you have a proper one implemented? It feels like it's pretty important. And I want to make sure our listeners understand it well.
I think a lot of folks, especially in tech, customer success, really OKRs is the thing that you hear a lot about, right? Everyone knows OKRs. And then other people, if they've come from smaller, non-traditional businesses, they know of EOS through the book Traction, et cetera. There's any number of modalities you can use. But at the end of the day, the operating system is giving your culture legs in the business. And so your people are powered by their experiences and their expectations. So that's kind of like my culture formula, right? Their experiences and their expectations mean the most. And if we think about it as a hierarchy of needs, if they know what's expected of them in multiple ways, and that is reinforced with experiences, whether that is one-on-one conversations with your manager, team meetings, we're thinking about the expectations dialed out in SOPs. All of those things come together to reduce the amount of anxiety an individual has in their role. It increases their confidence and their speed to action. And so we had employed multiple systems, and we used a hybrid version of EOS and OKRs, and we developed our own system. You don't have to develop your own. You can use a cookie cutter one and you'll find your way. Yeah. But for us, understanding that and really ensuring that we lived day by day with our mission, vision, and values and our operating principles, those things drove everything we did. And we were able to have significant success because of that, quite frankly.
I remember something which is somewhere in line with what you said. I used to speak with the CEO who told me at some point, when you are at 0, act and have a mindset 1 million. When you are at 1 million, act and have a mindset as in you are at 10 million. And when you are at 10 million, act as in you are at 100 million. And this will basically help you prepare the foundation for what's happening next.
Exactly right.
And because you mentioned that operational system is very important. And I know that in smaller companies, in startups, this is something overly neglected, or it's like, okay, everybody needs to have a mission, vision, value. Let's strategize it. Let's spend 1 hour or 1 day in a meeting room. We come up with something, and then what's next? I often heard about CEOs and talk with CEOs that do not know how to, okay, now that we have it, regardless of what's the words of that, how do we actually give it back, send it to the people that are behind us? How do we actually implement it? How do we cascade it? What's your take? Because I know that you used to be also chief of staff, and we'll talk about this, but I'm going to ask it now because it's more, context.
Yeah, this is something I'm super passionate about. And so my experience as a CS leader and chief of staff go hand in hand. I viewed the cascade as being a CSM for the business. And so in order to make sure that the business is operating well, we cascaded this OS. Now, a lot of the time what will happen is people will take their mission, vision, values and put it on the wall behind them. Everyone has them memorized, all of that. That takes hours. We took months to implement this. And so we actually brought in a consultant to help us articulate this throughout the organization, because there's nothing better than a third party that doesn't really give a damn about your ego to tell you the best way to do it. And also they're giving you the shortcut because they have done it. And so we worked with a wonderful consultant, Colin Talley, and he had scaled businesses to over $100 million. And he came and he said, the stuff you're worrying about right now will get fixed with this. And so we could breathe and create the space for everyone. And I can tell you, the CEO had no clue how to do this. We all learned how to do this. I did a lot more training with it through some certain courses as a COS, but our company did not think it was worthwhile until they saw the fruits of it about 6 months later. They were, meeting formats are crystallized. We even formatted every single meeting in the business. We're like, wow, we know every system to go to, every meeting. It reduces the anxiety. It shortens the time for employee onboarding. It actually shortens the time for customer onboarding because you know the resources, you know how to train, you know how to do everything you need to do to be successful. And so we over-indexed on it for a good year. And I would say 2019 into 2020, we started in July 2019, and through July 2020, we did full implementation of this program through a year-long program. And in the pandemic, because of that, literally because we had that, we could move pretty quickly and pivot to supporting the businesses we had. And we actually had our largest growth during the early days. So from, I would say, May through October 2020 is when we actually saw our most significant MRR growth.
From what I understand from you, and I'm going to ask you to, okay, what else besides this?
Yeah.
Well, in some situation, it's important to go to dedicated consultants or companies that have been done it and they are experts in their niche. So that would be one thing. This mission, vision, value, the backbone of the operational system that I mentioned is important, and you should have it regardless of if you are talking of a startup or a medium or large companies. And it basically helps you in the alignment of the team. And these alignments, you will easily translate it into business or will have a business impact. I want to ask you, what else? What other advice would you give to someone who's trying to scale the operations at a growing startup while maintaining a customer-first mentality? What else do they need to do carefully?
Well, I am very passionate about people. Mm-hmm. And so I think the ingredient that has not been talked about a lot here are the people. We understand technology changes, probably, innovation on a large scale happens roughly every 36 months. Mm-hmm. And so AI, for example, everyone's been talking about AI for about 3 years, but finally we have companies that are really transforming the way we do at least information related work with AI now, right? So we've been talking for a while. I think with people, you have to hire the right people and get them in the right seat and give them a clear mission for the next 2 to 3 years, right? That is not easy to do, but trust me, it's worthwhile. When you hire someone, and let's just say, because I had a conversation with them yesterday, director of marketing. If you hire a director of marketing and you say to them, yeah, we want you to come in and market, they're not going to know what to do. But if you very clearly say, okay, we are hiring an omni-channel director of marketing. We have channel partnerships here, here, and here that we want to scale for the next 2 years. And we want to do these 3 other things. That person it will be very evident who that person is through the interview and recruitment process. And then when you hire them, they're like, I know exactly what I need to do because I'm either comfortable doing it or I can step up to the plate and do it. But in addition to that, if they don't do it well, you know that the accountability is there to move them out. It's manageable, right? And so the people matter. And on the backside of all of this, you're doing everything to make sure that people can do their best work. The other thing it will also do is you won't end up hiring 3 people to figure out what you want to do. You will know exactly the right people you'll need to hire most of the time, right? It's an art and a science, but you can turn it into mostly science. And so the people, I think, are the most significant part of this that haven't been mentioned. And then in addition to that, the one thing I always will say, yes, the technology you're offering is great, but if your employees don't have the best technology at their disposal, you're asking them to, build a wall with a spork, and that just does not work. And so you have to give them the right tools. You have to give the people what they need to do their job. And that also kind of comes right back around in that virtuous cycle to their mission, vision, values, the operating system, and all of that.
So there are multiple advices that you give through this answer. And I hope the people who are listening to this episode will be able to take them on. Now, speaking about the personal habits, I might assume that scaling large operations at some point can be overwhelming. Or what personal habits help you stay grounded and focused while overseeing complex projects?
My wife keeps me humble and very grounded. So family matters to me a great deal. Those relationships matter. I will say one thing that I noticed that caused me to pay more attention to this as things grew was how people treat you based on title. When you scale to a certain size, so for example, I would say title, age of the business, et cetera. And so, when I started at the company, I was employee number 6 or 7. We could all fit in one small office if we wanted to. By the time I left, we were over 100 full-time employees. But in addition to that, our global workforce was over 600. And so when you scale that large, the lore around the original employees becomes something weird. Chief of staff to the CEO, you're the guy with the credit card at the bar kind of thing. And your role, yes, obviously transitions to being mentor, advisor, coach in a lot of regards. But the thing that had to keep grounded was remembering I was doing this for these people. And so I got rid of my ego as fast as possible. And I was the guy like, okay, if we're at an event, I'm not going to be sitting up front or in a special section, act like ivory tower syndrome is what I call it. I was going to be boots on the ground, moving things around, helping my team do things and leading by example in that regard. Because for me, I come from Philly, we're blue collar city. And so there's no errors about it. You can be successful and still help pick up trash, right? And so I very much live in that servant leader mentality. And so I was all about doing those things. And those things also kept me grounded in a way. But really, it was making sure I had a good core at home I was able to articulate my value, but also I didn't take myself too seriously. Other people can take you way more seriously than you will. Giving myself like a good bit of grace and a lot of humor got me through a lot of interesting storms. And then also working with and hiring people who understand that as well, right? Like this is a great journey for all of us. We should enjoy this, live in the moment while we look toward the future. And so it was really challenging at certain points. You're visiting and they're like deferential and people are trying to get access. And you're like, wow, we're not that large of a business. But when they hear the impact you've made or kind of the connections you have or this, it gets bizarre in some ways. And so I stayed grounded in some fundamental ways, which I'm thankful for.
I often hear the saying, you have to be bad before you are good. So I have to ask that scaling CS ops means that customer experience takes a hit in the early stages.
Yes, it's very bad before it's even mediocre. I had a lot of failures, still have a lot of failures, right? And so back in the design pickle days and some other consulting days, you're absolutely horrendous. The reason you know you need to scale customer success is because the customer experience is taking a hit and customers aren't staying. So you have to figure something out. So it is not an easy role, but yeah, you fail a lot. I remember we tried a partnerships program. I tried like multi-year authoring deals for contracts. Like, hey, we're going to get you in a 5-year deal for X amount. Like we did everything and it just didn't work. But similarly, internally, once we created our OS and we crystallized what mattered to them and really built out the systems that mattered, immediately you start to see successes. So I would say I did not feel comfortable as a CS leader that I had like a good product for 2 years. And so if you're building something from scratch, or you're scaling something that you inherited that's been around for a year or two, it's going to take a while to turn that corner. Conversely, I'm over at NoFraud now, and I have an amazing team. I work at an amazing business with great leaders. I've been at the business just shy of a year, and we're just turning the corner. We had to do a lot of foundational work. We failed a lot. Yes, you're going to see some of your larger logos churn, and you're going to have to answer for it, sure. But at the end of the day, there are more lessons in all of that early on than later. If you're just like, oh, well, they churn and you move on to get the next client, you're never going to figure out the leaky bucket. And you're going to end up being underwater faster than you could possibly imagine. So yes, you will make a lot of errors early on. I'm a testament to I make errors every single day. But as long as you learn from those errors, you'll be far more successful.
So I want to remain on the scaling side. What's the difference between scaling the operations from the business side and scaling the team? What's the process when you try to scale the team? What do you need in order to have a successful team scaled with as minimum impact, I would say, on the team and also on the business? Because someone is taking the hit when you are trying to scale.
Scaling, when I think of the word itself, I think of pressure.
Okay.
Right? And so there's going to be pressure in the business as you scale. It is exciting when you start to see your revenue increase rapidly. And then very quickly, things start to break. Things start to not move as you expected. And I would say like that is important both in recognizing operational scale as well as people scale, right? And so what will happen is you see a lot of problems, a lot of things break. What ends up happening is you throw a human body at the problem. You start hiring like crazy. Yeah. And then what happens is you actually fix the problems, you gain more efficiency, and then you don't need those bodies. And you get frustrated that you're wondering where your newfound revenue went. And it went to those people. And so I think it is, what you'll hear me often say, it is a mix of art and science. Science in a lot of instances, art most of the time as well. And you've got to figure out that balance. So for us, when it comes to scaling, our product very much had significant human elements. And so we scaled humans. We very much did. But we also knew that we couldn't scale as quickly. We were prepared to deal with customer blowback before we were just going to throw more bodies at the problem. I don't necessarily recommend that to everyone because your business could be different. If you're scaling and it's a true technical solution, you're going to need to invest in better infrastructure, right? You should think about what are the foundational things you need as you're scaling. For us, we were human driven. Here at NoFraud now, we are human driven to a degree, but then very technically driven. So we can scale our core product. I won't say infinitely, but it does scale. We know the proportions at which that will scale. In terms of other elements and professional services we offer, there's a limit. And so we have to figure out those things, and we talk about product efficiency. So you definitely, similar to what you were mentioning about the CEO who said, think about 10 when you're a 1. You have to do the exact same thing. You have to think, what is the best possible solution long-term for this, right? Now, and I tend to be long-winded around this because I think here's the flip side of this. Here's why this matters. If you can operationalize things technically, build your efficiencies, and suffer a little bit, do what doesn't scale until it scales, you don't actually have to hire people and then lay them off. I'm very passionate about making sure you're building properly and not building for building's sake or for hiring's sake. And I see a lot of companies, they will build the technical solution after they've had the people there and then lay the people off. And it's like, well, if you just took 6 more months, slowed sales a little bit, your board might be a little upset, but slowed sales down just a touch, built these operational efficiencies, you can actually scale 2x after that because you now have the technical know-how to do what you're doing. So it's about pacing yourself. And for me, again, my opinion, my experience would say that, and I want to test that, right? It could be complete foolishness, but for me, if you're scaling appropriately and finding your efficiencies when you can, you don't need to go gangbusters on people. It also is just showing that you respect the people and you're hiring the right ones to do the job. We had some great infrastructure engineers that think about these things, and they should think about these things. What's going to break when we get 5x the volume? And if we're not asking those questions, it means we don't want to grow. And you have to ask those questions. You must ask those questions if you want to be in business. And I often think of what's the 50 or 100 year play. I'm not playing to be in business for 5 or 10 years. I'm playing to be in business for 50 or 100 years. And I know that the thing that I'm building now won't last that long, but if the ethos can, that's what's most important.
I want to go back and ask you more about what does it take to be head of CS at NoFraud and how did you actually structure your team and what did you do there? But before I go to that, I want to ask you if you ever felt that you are like a buffer between your team and senior leadership team, and how do you balance the two? Because at least in my case, in former organization, I felt like I have to pick a side. Is it the business or the people? And it was hard to do a balance. Maybe I did something wrong, or maybe there were some broken systems into your organization. Let's comment a bit. Or is there a balance between the business, between the people and the business KPIs, or you have to pick sides?
I find most of the time there's a balance, and I don't generally have to pick sides because I believe we all have the same mission at hand. And so for me, I don't generally pick sides. But I will also say, I don't want to work someplace where the people of customer success and the mission of customer success are not valued.
Okay.
And so the leader doesn't get it. Like if the CEO isn't like customer success is one of the most important things we have here, then I try not to work there. Very clearly will try not to work. There are companies that after I left Design Pickle, I went into consulting with the hope of possibly joining. And it was not a fit because they didn't understand what customer success did, or they thought of it as a stopgap support system. And that is not the respect it needs. So for me, that's kind of how I look for work. But in addition to that, when I do join the team, yes, there's obviously like, Aaron, you've got to hit these KPIs, churn is up. What are we going to do? And what I will do is I will not walk with the harsh language to the team and say, this is what's being demanded of me, do the damn job. I will walk to the team and be like, we have an interesting problem we need to solve. Churn is up. What are you seeing working? Or what are you thinking about? Or I'll analyze things differently. But I don't internalize it. I don't pass that on to the team. But I make sure that they understand, like, this is what we have to solve for the next 90 days. And so I also work with leadership to highlight the right KPIs. I think part of it is because I'm a former COS. I know how to think through the systems view. Okay, well, we can work on revenue. We can get that up. But then also we have this other number. What numbers don't matter right now? And I can prioritize the KPIs a little bit. So I have that leeway. My CEO hearing this will probably be like, no, you don't. But I think that I do because we're building the foundational elements. Now, when things are up and running and humming, that's a very different conversation. But if you're in the building phase, you're going to have to make trade-offs from time to time. So I think that most of the time the KPIs matter until they don't. But the people in the team will have a better read, especially with our larger clients. Our CSMs are the most foundational element to their success and ours. And so I will trust my team in those instances. And the good thing is, so will senior leadership. So we've got a lot of trust and rapport built within customer success and within our senior leaders where we get some leverage there, but there will be a day, obviously, where the KPIs will have to be driven. But those days tend to be followed by days where it doesn't matter as much.
You mentioned earlier that it's important to work for an organization where your personal values align with the values of the company, that the person who hires you needs to respect the function and needs to understand customer success and needs to have a customer first approach. What else does Aaron need in order to be successful in his job? What are your demands whenever you are considering joining an organization?
Yeah, I have to know if the culture is Mac or PC. I'm a Mac man. I love remote work. I love traveling for work. And so meeting clients in cities, for example, I live in Los Angeles. I'm currently in a conference room in New York City. We have customer events and customer meetings this week. I do enjoy those aspects of it. I would say those are more of the perks than the core benefits.
Okay.
I think that the superpower of a good CSM is curiosity, and I've never lost that. For me, I want a manager and a boss and a leadership team that are deeply curious. And whatever functional area they're in is fine, but they're curious about a problem. But also interested in being a player coach with a servant leadership mentality as well. I would rather take a year and a half to find the right job than to just take a job for money. Because at the end of the day, if I don't have an experience alignment, a values alignment, or even an operational alignment, it's going to be much harder for all of us. And I just don't want to have to deal with that. If the manager themselves are not curious, they don't respect the function, they don't roll up their sleeves to help work alongside other folks, then I know it won't be a good fit for me. It is part and parcel to the experiences that I've had at work, but also the kind of person that I am. I want to work with people I enjoy working with. You don't have to be best friends. With you, then it's going to be a better work experience for all of us.
I don't want to end this discussion without actually knowing more about NoFraud and about the team that you built there, because most probably they are very lucky to have you as a leader. So please do tell me about your team and the way you structure it, what type of roles, responsibilities you have in the team. How did you end up to those? Tell me more about it.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with how I ended up at NoFraud. And then I'll talk about the team. So I ended up there a year ago. Fortunately for me, I met the CEO of NoFraud. He wasn't the CEO at the time. He had been at a company called Frame.io. And we met through connections in 2020. And we had more personal mentoring conversations. And so I saw on LinkedIn that he, years later, took this job over at NoFraud. I said, that sounds like a strange company. But when I connected with him and he was telling me about the business, I was like, that sounds pretty neat. It was just in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. Fast forward a few months, I was looking for opportunity and I saw that they were hiring for customer success. So I reached out to him and he gave me the brass tacks of it, gave me the unvarnished truth. And he very much values customer success. And I said, I'd like to put my hat in the ring. And I went through a very rigorous interview process. This was not like a hookup or anything. It was not a give me. It was a rigorous process. And I had to come face to face with the business. There's a lot of great things in this business. And there are things that I knew that I'd have to be boots on the ground, brass tacks, foundational building year 1 and 2. I knew that coming in. And that's what excited me most. And so once I was offered the role, thankfully, I accepted very quickly. And I inherited a couple of teams. And so I want to give a shout out to my CSMs. And for one former CSM who recently left the team for, an amazing opportunity that's in alignment with her goals. But Cynthia is the former CSM. We've got Lisa, Charlie, and Eric, who are currently the customer success managers on my team. They come with wealth of experience across this business and other businesses and are amazing CSMs. And then Charlie, who I mentioned, she is our scale CSM. So she's running the new programmatic operation that we're standing up through the back part of this year and into next year. And then I've got a wonderful support team with Will, Raph, and Jamie. And they have revolutionized how we manage customer support inbound through primarily email. We are adding some chat and we've got some phone in there. We're getting better every day, but they're just amazing. And then Jamie also helps with another individual, Randy, who's our onboarding manager. Jamie, yes, is support, but she's primarily a fraud analyst expert. And so she has worked on multiple internal operational teams and really helps with new customers coming in, understand how to use the platform. If there's any trends on their account that we need to be made aware of when it comes to fraud, et cetera. She's a whiz at that. And so that's the team that I've got. So we're split almost 50-50 customer support, customer success with an onboarding manager and kind of a solutions engineer. And so we've got a great team. But when I started the business, I just had 2 CSMs. And so we have grown and scaled and moved and shaped. And so their primary responsibility for the CSMs, for Lisa and Eric, for example, they're going to be dealing the named accounts. And then we've got a programmatic CSM. And then our support team is General Pop. And then the onboarding manager onboards every client that comes in the business, whether they have self-serve installed our product or worked with a salesperson. Our onboarding manager works with every single customer.
How did you end up to this formula? I'm curious.
Yeah, the needs of the business. Right. And so what the business needed is what articulated how the team is formatted. And for me, there's areas of professional services that we aren't tapping into just yet that we could eventually add on to the customer success operation. But the core business needs to be primary, get your support straight, get your CSMs together, onboard people well, and you can retain them. Then after that, you get to the fun stuff. And that's professional services for me, right? Professional services, yes, is obviously another way to add revenue to the coffers, but I don't look at it solely as that. I look at it as a way for us to get closer to our client and help them more. And that's the secret sauce is professional services. CSMs are great and they're wizards. They're going to be your generalists. And then as they grow, as they scale, eventually they're going to have some deep expertise. And guess what? You can offer that as a service. Until you build a product, and then you can, it's kind of this wonderful wheel, this cycle, right? And so I think a lot in cycles, if you can't tell.
Finally, if there's one key takeaway about customer success, not necessarily can be customer success. It can be about how to build a great company, how to recruit an awesome team that you would want our audience to remember from this conversation. What would that be?
I would say it's the thing that I remind myself every day, and it's related to kind of all of it. Nothing is perfect. And that's it. Nothing is perfect. And that's okay. Because today, like I have a laundry list of things I could focus on. That's okay. Nothing is perfect. Nothing is going to be ever perfect. But if every single day you look at your people and you're honest about that, you don't expect them to be perfect. I think that cascade comes down in so many different ways. And I am a human. I am not a machine. And I am not designed to work flawlessly. No one is, as a matter of fact. And so that grace you give to each other has to extend for you. And so, yeah, my team, we all mess up. I mess up more than anyone else on my team. They have far more knowledge than I do. Nothing is perfect. And I think we just have to acknowledge that and then move beyond that. And then life will be better for everyone. We don't have to keep that pressure on ourselves or anyone else. And that gives you grace to do better work. So that's my core kind of mantra. But that's the thing that I will say to anyone. Nothing is perfect, but keep working at it. And it's never going to be perfect is the last part of that. So yeah, that's my chief advice to anyone. Like take a breather, not perfect.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing your insights with us today. And a big thank you to all our listeners. Until next time, stay safe and keep mastering customer success.
Take care. Thank you.